Welcome to Beyond the Postcard. Let your eyes drift down to that stark, ink-stamped postmark. August 9th, 1943. World War II is at its absolute terrifying peak. Across the Atlantic, millions of lives are being shattered in the meat grinder of global conflict. Rivers of ink are being used by military censors to black out letters, to hide troop movements, to suppress panic. Every single piece of mail crossing the international border between Canada and the United States right now is treated with deep, paranoid suspicion. And out of that dark, tense world steps a man named Norman. He walks into a post office in Hamilton, Ontario. He buys 2 stamps to send a message back home to New Jersey. Look at those stamps. A 1-cent green, a 2-cent brown. They feature King George VI. But the king isn't wearing his formal ornate coronation robes here. He is dressed in a crisp, stiff military combat uniform. It was Canada's war-issued definitive series, a daily, mandatory reminder that the entire nation was mobilized for total war. Norman presses those stamps down onto the paper. He dips his pen into dark ink, and he writes to a woman named Dorothy in Merchantville, New Jersey. But he doesn't call her Dorothy. He uses an intimate, clipped nickname, Dear Dept. Arrived okay. Had a good trip. Uncle is well. Had a trip to Fulton. I have not seen anyone yet. George and Perk are okay. Weather is okay. Expect to see Aunt Flo tomorrow. Hope you and they are okay. Norman. 5 times in the span of just a few brief, hurried sentences, Norman uses the exact same phrase over and over again. Arrived okay. George and Perk are okay. Weather is okay. Hope you and Ty are okay. Norma's okay. Hope you and Thace are okay. Norman is okay. Human psychology tells us something deeply unsettling about repetition. When a traveler far from home in the middle of a world war insists 5 separate times in a single breath that everything is absolutely fine, your instincts tell you the exact opposite. What was Norman trying to outrun? What was the heavy, unspoken anxiety waiting for him back home in New Jersey or lurking in the shadows of Hamilton? He notes somberly, I have not seen anyone yet. He is moving through a strange, wartime industrial city, entirely isolated, desperate to project an illusion of total stability back across the border. He was trying to reassure Dorothy, or perhaps he was desperately trying to reassure himself. The warm, faded text disappears, replaced by the unnaturally bright, hand-colored view of a section of the rock garden, Hamilton, Canada. The lens lingers on the serene, glassy pond and the lush green hillsides. Suddenly, the color aggressively drains out of the frame. High contrast, black and white archival footage of a jagged, blasted wasteland. Look at what Norman was staring at when he took this trip. He wants to see a paradise. The postcard shows a tranquil, glassy pond reflecting a clear blue sky. It shows lush, sweeping greenery, vibrant flowers, and a picturesque limestone cliffs rising gracefully from the water. It looks like an ancient, untouched oasis of pure nature. But it is an absolute lie. The ground Norman is standing on when he mails this card isn't natural. It is a massive engineered scar. Long before it was a sanctuary for flowers, this exact plot of land was known simply as the Burlington Heights gravel pit. It was a brutalized, jagged industrial wasteland. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, aggregate companies used massive charges of dynamite to violently blast open the Niagara Escarpment, ripping out millions of tons of limestone, sand, and gravel to feed the roaring, smoke-belching steel furnaces of Hamilton's Canada's steel town. They blasted and tore at the earth until there was absolutely nothing left to extract. The soil was stripped of every nutrient, the land was entirely spent, and when the corporations were done, they simply walked away, leaving behind a massive, dead, hollowed-out crater. It became a dangerous eyesore littered with industrial debris, stagnant pools of toxic water, and treacherous climbing cliff faces. Then, the Great Depression struck. The economy collapsed. Thousands of local men found themselves completely destitute, starving and desperate for a single scrap of work. The city offered them a grueling deal. Take basic hand tools, pickaxes, shovels, and horse-drawn wheelbarrows, and go down into that deep, dead pit. Now picture this. Hundreds of desperate men sweating and breaking their backs in the freezing mud of winter and the blistering heat of summer. They dragged massive, heavy blocks of salvaged limestone from nearby railroad cuts, manually lining the giant walls of this giant hollow grave. They deliberately engineered a massive illusion. Every winding path, every hidden flight of limestone steps, and every gentle stream was meticulously laid out by a landscape architect to look completely natural, specifically designed to mask the violent industrial destruction of the earth beneath it. When the garden officially opened in 1932, it was celebrated as triumph. But when Norman stands there just 11 years later in 1943, taken in the quiet beauty of the water, he is actually standing inside a monument to human desperation and ecological ruin. He is admiring a beautifully decorated crater. The historical photos of the gravel pit dissolve into dark, modern-day footage of gnarled tree roots, creeping fog rolling over a high ridge, and shadows of low-hanging branches stretching across the screen. But the history of this place gets much, much darker. The scar of the gravel pit is only the top layer of the soil. To find the true horror of what Norman was walking through, we have to dig deeper into the ridge itself. The rock garden sits directly atop Burlington Heights, a narrow, high peninsula of land with sheer, terrifying drops into the water on both sides. During the War of 1812, this wasn't a place of leisure or industrial gravel. This was a dark, heavily fortified, disease-ridden British military outpost. It was their absolute last line of defense against an invading army, a place of pure, unadulterated wartime panic. And in the summer of 1814, it became a place of butcher shop justice. Look back into the grim judicial records of what became known as the Ancaster Bloody Assizes. 19 men were captured and accused of high treason. Local citizens who turned against their own neighbors to fight alongside the American forces. They were marched right up into this narrow ridge on Burlington Heights. On a stifling grim morning in July, 8 of those men were led out to the gallows. Because their crime was treason against the crown, their sentence wasn't a simple, clean execution. It was brutal, medieval, and meant to terrify the public. The 8 men were hanged, but before they could fully suffocate, while they were still clinging to life, they were cut down. Their bodies were violently mutilated, and the executioner used a heavy blade to legally fulfill the final part of the sentence. They were beheaded. Imagine the crown standing on these exact earthen banks, breathing in the summer air, watching an executioner hold up the dripping severed heads of 8 of their fellow countrymen, one by one. Where did those bodies go? There were no proper burials for traitors. Their remains were hurriedly dumped right there into the rough, rocky soil of the heights, buried in unmarked, shallow graves that were completely lost to time. But the soil was hungry for more than just the executed. That very same year, a horrific outbreak of typhus and camp fever ripped through the damp, dark military barracks on the heights. Hundreds of soldiers and terrified civilians died in absolute agony, sweating and shivering in the dark. The ground became so choked with corpses so quickly that the military couldn't keep up. They dug massive, long trenches along the ridge, unmarked plague pits where hundreds of bodies were piled on top of one another and covered in quicklime. When the industrial aggregate companies came in with dynamite to blast the gravel pit open, and when those starving Depression-era relief workers were down there with pickaxes digging out the very pond Norman is looking at, they were quite literally tearing through a forgotten mass military cemetery. The sheer limestone cliffs surrounding that peaceful water are a literal retaining wall, holding back the secrets of hundreds of men who died in terror, whose bones are still mixed into the dirt, just inches from the modern walking paths. When you look at the vibrant, unnaturally bright, hand-tinted colors on the front of Norman's postcard, the lush green trees, the deep yellow flowers blooming beautifully along the rocks, you have to ask yourself a terrifying question. What exactly is fertilizing that soil? Norman thought he was looking at a pristine sanctuary. In reality, he was staring straight into a beautifully decorated massive grave. The airy energy of the land doesn't stop at the edge of the water. If Norman had decided to walk just a short distance north of where this postcard photo was taken, stepping off the main paths into the neighboring lands that make up the rest of the gardens, he would have stumbled upon a truly bizarre artifact. Hidden deep into the silent grove of trees sits a single, solitary grave. It doesn't belong to a soldier, a relief worker, or a trader. It belongs to a horse. This is the final resting place of Martimus, a legendary multi-million-dollar late 19th century racehorse owned by a wealthy local industrialist named William Hendrie. Now, burying a prized horse with a formal Victorian headstone is unusual enough, but the local lore surrounding this ticket holds a much creepier, verified historical whisper. While the official park records suggest that the great horse was simply laid to rest beneath the sod, prominent descendants of the Hendrie family themselves openly shared a much unsettling detail. They claim the entire horse isn't down there. They whispered that when Martimus died, only the horse's severed head was taken, brought to this secret grove, and buried beneath that cold stone marker. Why just the head? Where is the rest of the massive creature's body? Was it a bizarre, ritualistic act of devotion, or something far more macabre? The historical record leaves it entirely unanswered, leaving a headless ghost to wander the periphery of the garden. The soil all around Norman's feet is absolutely saturated of these kinds of unsettling, hidden anomalies. Let us follow the final leg of this card's journey. It leaves Norman's ink-stained hands in Ontario. It is sorted by wartime postal workers, cleared by international customs censors, and travels hundreds of miles south, deep into New Jersey. It finally lands in a mailbox at Euclid Avenue in the quiet town of Merchantville. Walking down the porch steps of her home, the air is thick with summer heat. She opens the metal mailbox, flips through wartime notices and ration book updates, and pulls out this exact piece of cardboard. She flips it over. Sees a vivid, colorful depiction of a distant, peaceful Canadian paradise, a place completely untouched by the bombs dropping onto the ocean. Then she turns it over. It's Norman's frantic, repetitive cadence scratched into the back. Okay, 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 okay. Did she breathe a profound sigh of relief? Or did she know Norman well enough to read between the lines? Did she feel the underlying, shaken tension of a lone traveler far from home, navigating a world tearing itself apart at the seams? Never truly know what words passed between them. When Norman finally made it back across the border to New Jersey, we are left with this artifact, a single surviving piece of cardboard that bridged two ordinary people during the darkest chapter of the 20th century, a card that deliberately used a beautiful, engineered illusion of nature to mask a history of blasted earth, bloody betrayals, and secret graves, all while a desperate world tried to convince itself that everything was going to be okay. Thank you for being here at Beyond the Postcard.